Hello and welcome back to Koala Moon, children's bedtime stories and meditations designed to make bedtime a dream. Midnight and the Mouse by Gillian Rogerson. In a burrow beneath an old oak tree, a young mouse called Millie refused to go to bed. She told her mum she wasn't the tiniest bit tired, and she told her dad she wanted to go outside and play. She said she was going to stay up all night. Millie's mum and dad tried everything to get their little mouse to sleep. A cup of warm milk in Millie's favourite mug, a soothing lullaby from her dad, and lots of warm hugs. But nothing worked on Millie. Millie's mum decided there was only one thing left to do. She collected 3 acorn tops from the far side of the burrow and took them outside. She carefully placed them on the grass beneath the branches of the old oak tree. Then she waited. For the creatures of Sleepy Forest know magical help is always available to those who need it. And one way to summon that help is by placing 3 acorn tops outside a home. Within seconds, assistance arrived for Millie's mum in the shape of a small fairy. The fairy's silver wings fluttered gently. She was wearing a dress the colour of the night sky, and a dark blue velvet pouch hung around her waist. The fairy looked at Millie's mum and softly said, "You called for me?" "I did," Millie's mum answered. "My little one won't go to sleep. Can you help me, please?" "Indeed I can. Where is the restless one?" Millie popped her head out of the burrow. Her eyes widened when she saw the fairy. The fairy's eyes twinkled like stars as she looked at Millie. "Hello, my name is Midnight. I'm a sleep fairy. I'm going to help you fall asleep tonight." "I'm not tired," Millie replied. "I know," the fairy said with a smile. "Come with me." Millie looked at her mum to see if it was okay to go with the fairy. Her mum gave her a tired nod. Midnight took Millie by the paw and they headed into the moonlit forest. Millie's whiskers twitched as they walked along. She'd never been out of the burrow at night before. The air smelled different, and Millie wasn't sure if she liked it. Millie asked the fairy where they were going. Midnight replied, "It seems to be a night when many mums and dads are having trouble getting their babies to sleep. We're going to help them." "How?" Millie asked. With a mysterious smile, Midnight said, "You'll see." Midnight led Millie over to the hedgerow where a family of hedgehogs lived. The baby hedgehogs were asking their mother for another bedtime story, but the mother had already told them 2 stories. And she just could not think of another tale to tell her babies. Midnight saw what was happening and reached into the velvet pouch, which was tied around her waist. She pulled out a handful of rainbow-coloured glitter and gently cast it into the air. The glitter caught on a breeze and floated towards the mother hedgehog. The shimmering sparkles landed on her prickles, shone brightly for a second, and then melted. The mother hedgehog suddenly smiled at her babies and said, "Let me tell you the tale about the 100-year-old hedgehog who had the power to grant wishes. Once upon a time, in a land not far from here, there lived the most magical creature." Millie and Midnight stayed nearby and listened to the captivating story. One by one, the young hedgehogs started to drift off to sleep. Millie felt her eyes growing heavy too. Midnight whispered to Millie, "Are you ready for sleep?" Millie's eyes opened. She shook her head. "I'm not tired." The fairy nodded. "Okay, come with me." They came to a stop near a family of badgers next. The young badgers were running around the burrow while their parents looked on helplessly. Midnight pulled some glitter from her pouch and sent it fluttering towards the mum and dad badger. Millie wondered what was going to happen next. She soon found out. As the magical glitter landed on the parents, they started to sing. Soft, lilting notes came from both of them. The young badgers became as still as statues as the mesmerizing melody filled their home. The little badgers settled down and listened in complete silence as their mum and dad performed a dreamy duet. One by one, the babies fell asleep. Millie lay down and put her head on her paws. Midnight whispered to her, "Are you ready for sleep?" Millie stood up and said, "I'm not tired." The fairy nodded. "Okay, come with me. We have to check on the creatures of the forest." Under the light of the moon, Millie continued to walk with Midnight through Sleepy Forest. Together, they climbed a tree and checked on the snoozing squirrels who were snuggled between the branches. After that, Midnight and the mouse went down a hole at the edge of a glade. They walked along twisting tunnels until they found a family of resting rabbits. Their next journey took them to the far side of a meadow, where they found some deer dozing behind the hanging branches of a weeping willow tree. All over the forest came the hushed voices of parents saying, "Good night, sweet dreams, we love you." Midnight gave Millie a gentle smile and said, "Everyone is asleep." "I'm not," Millie said with a little yawn. Midnight took a handful of glitter from her pouch and gave half of it to Millie. She told the little mouse, "There's one more thing we have to do tonight. Millie looked at the glitter in her paw and asked, "What?" "We need to send peaceful dreams around the forest. Watch." The fairy gently blew the glitter into the air. Millie did the same. The glitter twirled and whirled around the fairy and the mouse and surrounded them in a rainbow-coloured halo. Millie watched in amazement as one fuzzy image after another appeared on the sparkling curtain in front of her. "What's happening?" Millie asked. Midnight explained. "These are what creatures of the forest dream about. Let's send these dreams on their way." She slowly moved her hands back and forth through the air, as if conducting an orchestra. Millie copied her. The rainbow-coloured sparkles grouped together and made dream bubbles. Inside each bubble, images began to move. The dream bubble floated closer to Millie. She saw a smiling otter inside it. He was lying on his back and floating down a river. The faint tinkling sound of water came from the bubble. The river slowly carried the otter under a wooden bridge. Reflections of the water danced on the underneath of the bridge. The otter continued floating along and passed by a field full of purple plants. The peaceful scent of lavender wafted towards Millie and made her whiskers twitch. She felt the gentle heat of the sun on her fur, as if she were actually inside the dream bubble with the otter. Her little body felt warm and weightless as she continued to watch the otter drift downstream. A soft wind caught the dream bubble and sent it on its way. Another bubble came close. Millie saw a laughing frog inside it. The frog was joyfully leaping from lily pad to lily pad across a pond. His laughter was light and infectious, and Millie found herself laughing along with him. The dream bubble rose from her and went on its way. A third bubble appeared. Inside was a mole walking through a moonlit meadow. He was looking left and right, as if searching for someone. Out of the shadows came another mole. She smiled shyly. "My love," the first mole called out, "will you dance with me on this fine evening?" "Of course I will, my sweetheart," the other one replied. As the moon looked down, the love-struck moles moved towards each other, their paws outstretched. The couple held paws as they danced lightly around the meadow. Watching them made Millie's heart feel full of love. She let out a happy sigh, which caused the dream bubble to glide away. The next bubble showed a wise-looking owl perched at the top of a tree. She was chatting to the full moon. "Isn't it a beautiful evening?" the owl said. "It certainly is," the moon replied. "But don't you think the stars could look a little brighter?" The owl tipped her head to one side, looked closer at the stars, and said, "Perhaps." The moon asked the owl if she would be kind enough to polish the stars for him. "Not all of them," the moon said with a smile. "Just these ones nearby." The owl fluffed up her feathers before taking to the sky. Using her wings, she gently cleaned the stars until they sparkled like diamonds. Once she was satisfied that enough stars had been polished, the owl returned to the tree. In happy harmony, the owl and the moon gazed at the sky and agreed it looked extra enchanting that night. Millie's eyes felt very tired as she watched the bubble slip upwards into the dark sky. Her heavy legs couldn't take another step. She lay down and said to the fairy, "I'm tired. I know it's time for you to go home." Midnight softly stroked Millie's head. "We don't have to walk back." For the last time that night, Millie took some glitter from her pouch. She sprinkled it on the ground. A rainbow-colored cloud appeared above the grass. The fairy helped Millie onto the cloud. It felt soft, warm and snuggly. Midnight sat next to Millie and tucked the cozy cloud around the mouse like a blanket until only Millie's little face peeked out. The cloud rose smoothly from the ground and headed skyward. Millie couldn't keep her eyes open a moment longer. She turned on her side and curled up into a ball. Midnight kissed the top of Millie's head and whispered, "Go to sleep, little one. It won't be long till..." Millie snuggled down even further in the cloud. It felt like a warm hug. Sleep came closer to her as the cloud drifted across the night sky. A small smile came to Millie's face as she heard the distant hoot of an owl, and she wondered if owls really did polish stars. Night-time sounds carried on in whispering wings as the fairy and the mouse headed towards the burrow beneath the old oak tree. More dream bubbles floated in the night sky as gentle as wishes. Millie didn't see them, but the little fairy did. Midnight smiled when she saw the carefree animals inside the bubbles. There were going to be a lot of restful sleeps in Sleepy Forest tonight. Before too long, Millie felt herself being lifted from the cloud by her dad's familiar arms. She was taken into her cozy burrow and placed in her warm bed. She sighed happily as Millie drifted off into a deep and happy slumber. She heard her mum and dad say, "Good night, sweet dreams, we love you."
Time to meet our little ducky duo. This is The Lazy Duck's Rainy Day by Luke Prendergast. On a gentle bend of Sleepy River, which meanders its way slowly through Sleepy Forest, lived two young ducks. They had bright white feathers, golden beaks, and little yellow webbed feet. They were sisters, and their names were Bread and Butter. Bread and Butter lived in a nest made out of twigs and leaves, snuggled right down among the dense reeds that grew on the banks of the river. Anyone who happened to be walking along the riverside would no doubt spot Bread and Butter sailing up and down on the river, kicking their yellow webbed feet and quacking merrily at each other as they went. One early morning, Bread, who was the older of the two sisters, but only by a couple of minutes, was just waking up. There was a cool, silvery light breaking in through the roof twigs of their nest, and her sister Butter was still rousing herself out of sleep beside her. Bread stretched her wings wide, poked her head out of the top of her nest, and was delighted by what she saw. It was raining. Little droplets of rain fell from the sky, making their plip, plip, plop sound on the river water, like the tinkling notes of a xylophone. Water could be heard dripping from the leaves of the trees and pattering down like tiny little footsteps on the mulchy ground. "Butter, wake up!" Bread quacked for joy. "Wake up, wake up!" Butter, who often found that her sister didn't want to get moving in the morning, gave a big yawn. "Ooh, what is it?" she said, but Bread wouldn't tell her. "Just come and see," she quacked. "Quickly!" Butter rubbed the sleep from her eyes, pulled herself up, and poked her head out of the nest like her sister did. "Oh, Bread!" she quacked. "What a day! Why didn't you tell me? It's a rainy day." For the truth was, there was nothing that Bread and Butter enjoyed more than a lazy, rainy day on Sleepy River. While some creatures might not like the rain because it got their feet wet or their fur damp or splashed in their eyes, that was not the case for these two sisters. With their waxy feathers and flippery feet, ducks were in their element in the rain. They didn't say, "Water off a duck's back," for nothing, after all. As they ate their breakfast of toast and seeds and pulled on their bright yellow bucket hats, Bread and Butter chatted about how they would spend their rainy day. They agreed that they would spend a lot of time floating up and down the river, enjoying the rain. "And we could make a big splash and have a water fight," suggested Bread, who was the more energetic of the two sisters. I'm not sure about that," replied Butter, who didn't really like to overexert herself very much at all. "I'd really like a lazy day. We can find a nice quiet corner in the rushes and just sit there, enjoying the drizzle." Bread picked up her bright green umbrella, the most fashionable item she owned. One of the reasons she loved rainy days was because she got to take it out with her. "Well," she said, "let's head out and see." So the two sisters waddled out of their nest and hopped from its twiggy edges onto the gently drifting currents of the river. "Oh, isn't this wonderful?" Bread sighed as she felt the cool water running over her feathers. "Just the best kind of day," Butter agreed. Bread and Butter floated down the river, enjoying the sound of the falling rain, which they thought was like a forest orchestra coming to life. Soon enough, they reached an area where the river current slowed down and collected into a wide pool. "Look what I could do," Bread said to her sister. "Are you watching? Are you sure?" And when she was sure that Butter was watching, Bread took a big gulp of air and stuck her head underwater so that she was upside down, half submerged, with her little yellow feet flapping this way and that in the air. Butter couldn't help but let out a big quacking laugh. Her sister looked so funny upside down in the water. When Bread turned the right way round again, she shook her head so little droplets of water were flung in an arc, and told Butter that now it was her turn. "Go on," she encouraged her, "and make sure you flap your feet extra fast." Butter took a big mouthful of air, counted to 3, and stuck her head under the water. Now it was Bread's turn to laugh, looking at Butter's feet waving about in the air like that. And when Butter came back the right way round, the two sisters laughed and quacked together, because rainy days were so much fun. Then, to their great surprise, a sparkling orange and white koi carp stuck his head out of the water. "Hello, my ducks," he said. Bread and Butter flapped their wings in greeting. "Oh, hello, Koji," they quacked, recognizing their good friend. "How are you on this rainy day?" Very fine, said Koji the koi carp. "Can't be complaining, not with this glorious weather like this." Bread and Butter looked up at the sky. They couldn't agree more. Koji the koi carp said that he had seen the two sisters ducking their heads under the water and had wondered if they were going for a dive. "A dive?" repeated Bread curiously. "What do you mean?" A dive, Koji explained, was when you kicked down all the way beneath the water to see what was down below. "There are some beautiful pebbles on the riverbed," he said. "I can show you if you like." As far as Butter was concerned, diving sounded like quite a strenuous, energetic activity for what was supposed to be a very lazy, rainy day. But her sister's face was lit up with such bright joy at the prospect that she said, "Okay, Koji, show us." So, Koji the koi carp showed the sisters that if they ducked their head under the water like they had before, and then kicked with their yellow webbed feet, then they'd be able to swim down to the riverbed. "Let's give it a go," he said. The sisters, this time in unison, took a big gulp of air, ducked their heads under the surface of the water, and kicked. What fun it was, Bread thought, as she propelled herself through the water, feeling its cool touch slipping over her feathers. Even Butter thought to herself, as she swam down, that diving was fairly exciting, even if it was a little like hard work. Koji showed them all the way down to the riverbed and pointed out plenty of pretty little stones, glittering black onyx, pink quartz, little white ones that looked like tiny eggs. Butter found a turquoise stone and a bright blue one that looked like a little piece of fallen sky, and she picked them up with her beak and slid them under her yellow bucket hat to keep them safe. They'd look very nice as decorations for the nest, she thought. Back at the surface, Bread and Butter thanked their friend Koji the koi carp for showing them what fun diving in the rain was. "No problem, my ducks," said Koji, before, with a swish of his long silvery tail, he swam away. Bread and Butter continued on down the sleepy river. Bread thanked Butter for going diving with her, and Butter told her it was no problem at all. "What would you like to do now, on this lazy, rainy day?" Bread asked her sister. Butter twitched her beak thoughtfully, considering her options. "I think I'd like to go and perch in a tree," she said, "and watch the rain falling into the river from above." Bread thought that sounded like a lovely plan, but she hoped that they wouldn't be doing it for too long, or else she might get bored. But she said to Butter, "What a wonderful idea!" And with a flap of their wings, the two ducks rose from the river and flew up through the falling rain until they came to rest on the branch of a big sycamore tree. They gave their feathers a flap to dispel the water, but just as they were folding them up on their backs, they heard a long, slow voice. "Oh, hello," it said. "Welcome to my tree." The sisters looked up along the branch and caught sight of their new companion. It was Fudge the sloth, and the reason they hadn't spotted her before was because she wasn't sitting on the tree branch. She was hanging below it. "Oh, hello there," Bread said. "I hope we haven't disturbed you." "We were only coming up here," Butter explained, "to sit quietly and contemplate the rain." "Not at all," Fudge replied at length. "I always welcome company." Bread was cocking her head at the sloth curiously. She wondered why she was always sounding like she was forgetting what she was saying halfway through saying it. "Why are you hanging upside down?" she asked. "Oh," Fudge replied, "because I find that it's much more comfortable when you enjoy dozing like me to be off your feet rather than on them." Butter, who also enjoyed dozing, had her interest piqued. "Is that so?" she asked. "Why?" "Yes," said the sloth. "If you don't believe me,
You should try it.
Okay then, quacked Butter. I will. And so Butter gripped the branch tightly with her yellow-webbed feet, and taking courage, swung around on the branch until she was hanging upside down.
Wow, yawned the sloth. What do you think?
Butter had to admit that, in fact, it was very comfortable indeed, and the world looked rather wondrous upside down. The river up above her, where the sky was supposed to be, and the blue-grey sky spread out below her, as though it were the ground. Best yet, the rain now seemed to fall upwards, shooting up from the sky below and landing in the river up above. How marvellous! You have to try this, Butter told Bread. And so Bread grasped her feet around the sycamore branch and spun around to meet her sister. What do you think, Bread? Butter asked. Well, said Butter, I have to say, it's more fun than I was expecting it to be. The two sisters stayed hanging very peacefully off their branch, taking in slow, long drawn-out words with the sloth, and enjoying watching the world go by, upside down. But soon all the blood went to their heads, and they began to feel a little bit dizzy. Time to carry on with our lazy rainy day, don't you think, Bread? Butter asked her sister. I couldn't agree more, Bread replied. Both ducks swivelled round on their branches, and thanking the sloth ever so much for showing them just what a topsy-turvy world looked like, they took off from the sycamore branch and sailed gently through the falling rain, landing in two little splashes on Sleepy River. The day was getting on. Although the sun was hidden behind the big mushroom-like rain clouds, Bread and Butter could tell by the colour of the light that it was the afternoon. They had been having a very lazy day indeed. Soon they came to the part of the river where a beaver named Buck had recently built a dam. It was a very beautiful part of Sleepy Forest, with riverbanks covered in brightly coloured flowers, and a nightingale who, when it wasn't raining, sang a sweet and melodious song that carried softly through the trees. This afternoon, Buck was relaxing on the veranda at the front of his dam. He was wearing a red and black plaid cap with big ear flaps. When he saw Bread and Butter come sailing around the river bend, he got up and leant over the balcony. Howdy there, Bread and Butter, he called out, for they were old friends. Taking a trip down the river on this fine and rainy day, are we? Bread and Butter flapped their wings and said yes, indeed they were. How about you both come up here and have a relax on my veranda? I can put the kettle on, we can have a cup of tea, and a little something to eat. Oh, yes, please, said Bread. I am feeling rather peckish, said Butter, and all three of them laughed at her joke. Bread and Butter flapped their wings and rose into the air, alighting on the veranda of Buck's dam. It was a very impressive dam indeed, with intricate carvings and decorations. Buck had built it all himself, with his hammers and nails and his sharp front teeth. Now, Buck said, while the two ducks got settled, what shall I make you for lunch? How does some toast sound? There's nothing I like more than a slice of toast, Bread told him. As long as there's plenty of butter, her sister added. Bread and Butter sank into the bean bags that Buck had lying out on his veranda. There they sat, watching the peaceful dripping of the drizzle, while inside they could hear the sound of a kettle boiling and the crunch of toast as it was cut with a knife. Soon enough, Buck came back out, balancing a tray on his paws. He handed the sisters a cup each and poured hot steaming tea from a perfect porcelain teapot into them. The teapot had a tea cosy on it that made it look like a duck, and the sisters quacked with laughter. "Look, Butter," said Bread, "it's you." "Oh no, Bread," said Butter. "I think it looks much more like you." Then Buck handed them a plate of richly buttered toast and an extra little jug with an unfamiliar liquid in it. Bread sniffed the jug. It smelled sweet. "What's this?" she asked. "That," Buck replied, "is maple syrup. I made it myself from the sap I collected from the maple tree, right here in Sleepy Forest. Have a taste, it's a real treat." "There's really no way I prefer to spend a lazy day," Buck said, kicking back and taking a slurpy sip of his tea, "than having a warm cup of tea, a bite to eat, and some gentle conversation with some good friends. Don't you think?" Bread and Butter said they agreed wholeheartedly. They told Buck about their day, about how they'd gone diving with Koji the koi carp, even though that was a little more energetic than Butter liked to be on a rainy day. And then how they'd hung upside down in the sycamore tree with Fudge the sloth, even though Bread was worried she might get a little bored. They agreed, however, that sitting there with Buck on his veranda, watching the rain fall slantingly and the river trickle past them beneath them, was the best of both worlds. It wasn't too demanding for Butter, but it was interesting enough to keep Bread from nodding off accidentally. It was, in a word, just perfect. They chatted merrily and watched the rain. They finished their tea and their buttered toast with maple syrup. Buck even went back inside to get a box of shortbread biscuits, which they nibbled over together. "Thank you, Buck," Bread said. "You've been ever so generous and kind. I wish we had something to give you in return." And just as Bread was saying this, Butter had an idea. "We do have something to give you," she said, and she took her yellow bucket hat off her head and tipped it upside down. From within tumbled the two beautiful pebbles she'd gathered from the riverbed, one of the deepest turquoise, the other such a bright blue it looked like a little piece of the sky. "These are for you," Butter said to Buck, handing him the pebbles. "They'll be a pretty decoration for your dam." Buck took the pebbles in his paw, thanking the sisters over and over again. He was very touched by their gift. "I know just where they'll go," he told them. "They'll look beautiful on my windowsill. Now," he added, "who'd like another cup of tea?" And so Bread and Butter sat on Buck's veranda while he made another cup of tea. And when he came out, they talked about all kinds of things. They watched the clouds shift and change in the sky, turning deep purple as they filled up with rain, then bleaching a light mauve as they emptied their droplets all over the forest. They watched the sun sinking behind the clouds, turning the sky first a pale grey, then a dark indigo, and finally black. Finally, Bread turned to her sister and said, Come on, Butter. It's our bedtime now.
Oh, you're right, said Butter, yawning.
It really is. They thanked Buck again for his generous hospitality, and then they swam back up the sleepy river to where their snug home was nestled among the reeds. They took off their bucket hats and shook their wings dry. They brushed their beaks and pulled on some warm socks to sleep in. As they were nuzzling down into bed, Butter said to her sister, "That was the best rainy day we've ever had, don't you think?"
"Oh, yes," said Bread.
"The best lazy rainy day ever." They were both yawning now. For a lazy day, it had still been a pretty tiring one. "Good night, Bread," said Butter.
"Good night, Butter,"
said Bread. And then the two ducks, sisters and best friends, closed their eyes and began to drift off. And little did they know it, but their final thoughts before sleep took them were the same. What, they wondered as they fell asleep, would the weather be like tomorrow? This is The Owl and the Pussycat by Jane Thomas. Ollie and his brother Oscar live at the very top of a very tall, very grey building. Sometimes their home is so high in the sky that they live above the clouds, looking out onto a rolling world of white. But on days when it's clear, they can see for mile after mile, looking across at all the other very tall, very grey buildings. Oscar and his brother Ollie live on the edge of one of the largest cities in the world. If they look out of the windows on the right side of their home, all they see is a sea of grey and concrete. But if they look out of the windows on the left side of their home, they can see the smooth billows of green hills leading up to purple mountains that disappear into the sky. They count themselves as very lucky indeed, because they are one of the few homes in this city that has such a wonderful, endless view. They share their home with their parents and, perhaps even more importantly, their large grey cat called George. George is something of a giant, a huge ball of a cat who likes to leap from Oscar's lap to Ollie's lap and back again, snuggling into their hugs and purring softly as their fingers ripple through his fur. When Oscar and Ollie go out to school, George spends his time curled up on the windowsill, looking out at the green world that stretches forever into the distance. From his great height, everything is made miniature, and he isn't quite sure how large the duck pond really might be, or whether the trees are as tall as him, or as tall as Oscar, or, goodness, even taller than that. And at night, George sometimes sleeps on the end of Oscar's bed, and sometimes sleeps on the end of Ollie's bed, and sometimes he returns to the windowsill to look out over the silent world. Everything is so much more peaceful at night. There are no cars sending the noise of their honking horns drifting up to him, and no ambulances with sirens, and no groups of school children shouting as they set off home. At night, after the street lights have been dimmed, after everyone in every room in every building has gone to sleep, there is a stillness to the world. George loves the night time for the stillness and for the visits from his friend. Barnaby sometimes swoops by to see George, his long wings white against the black of the night. It's odd that a cat and an owl should be friends, but friends they are. George tells Barnaby everything Oscar and Ollie learned in school each day, and Barnaby tells George all about the world he has only ever seen but never visited. Thanks to Barnaby, George has become very good at imagining the feel of grass beneath his paws, the scent of flowers in the air, and the way droplets of water might hang, gleaming with rainbows from his fur. On this night, a particularly still and clear night, when a million stars light up the sky, and it seems as if the moon has had an extra polish, George is telling Barnaby all about a poem that Oscar learned in school. It's all about, he tells him, an owl and a cat. Barnaby pricks up his ears. This sounds much more interesting than the complicated sums George had tried to explain a few nights ago. To be honest, Barnaby hadn't been quite convinced that George really understood what he was talking about, but he was far too polite to mention this to his friend. But a poem was right up Barnaby's street. He loved the music of poetry, and one about an owl and a cat was definitely going to be one worth listening to. He settled onto his perch and listened as George recited the lines. The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a £5 note. Barnaby sighed. It sounded wonderful. In his mind's eye, he pictured George sat at one end of a little sailing boat, and him at the other. With a start, he realised he'd missed a few lines. They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows, and there, in the wood, a piggy-wig stood, with a ring at the end of his nose. Barnaby started wondering where they might find a bong tree, for he had certainly never seen a tree with such a name, and he'd never met a pig with a nose ring. But if humans could have them, why not pigs? George hadn't slowed down for Barnaby's wandering mind, and so he listened in again and heard the final lines. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon, and hand in hand, on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon, the moon, the moon. They danced by the light of the moon. George sighed as he finished the poem and looked across at his friend. "Doesn't it sound wonderful?" he said. Barnaby nodded. "We could make it happen, you know," he said thoughtfully. "Perhaps not for a year and a day. I think Oscar and Ollie would be terribly upset if you disappeared for that long. But yes, I know where we could find just such a boat." George looked across at his friend. His paws kneaded the concrete beneath, and he imagined trailing them over the side of a boat and feeling the sea. He thought about seeing rings in pigs' noses and finding out what a bong tree looked like, and stared at his paws to try and work out how they might hold whatever a runcible spoon might be. "Do you think we can be back by dawn?" he said at last. The night was as beautiful a night as he had ever seen. It seemed to be filled with magic, and was surely the finest night he would ever know to have an expedition in a pea-green boat. "Promise," said Barnaby, sweeping his wing across his heart. If you had known to look across at that building on that very night, you might have seen the white sweep of a barn owl drifting slowly down the side, and behind him, walking first this way and then that as he slowly descended the hundreds of steps that made up the wrought iron fire escape, you would have seen a large grey cat. The cat may be something of a giant, and he may have always known that he could leave at any time by taking this route, but he wasn't a particularly courageous animal and had never left home before. The cat paused every now and then, and the owl would hover in mid-air, seeming to talk with the cat and coax him onwards. And then the cat would continue, paws being placed very carefully and specifically on each and every step. For that is how George and Barnaby descended to the street, and where George felt, for the first time, the grass beneath his paws. It was a tickling softness, firm and giving all at the same time. And the smell was like nothing George had ever known. Barnaby waited patiently while George rolled first this way, then that, arching his back into the grass and stretching his tail into the depths of the green. They went slowly through the park towards the boating lake, where a series of colourful wooden boats lay bobbing gently in the moonlight. Barnaby chose a pea-green boat and, using his beak and a few stiff pulls, managed to untie the knot. George put a tentative paw into the boat, leaping back onto the dock as it wibbled and wobbled under his weight. "It's perfectly safe," reassured Barnaby, standing in the boat and leaning to the left and to the right, showing how it rocked gently back and forth, without ever turning over. George took a single bold leap and jumped into the bows of the boat, burying himself against the boards until the movement had quite stopped. Barnaby showed him which ropes to pull to raise the sail, and together they watched as the huge white sheet gently ballooned in the soft breeze, filling with just enough wind to ease them slowly, so slowly, out across the lake. George looked at the ripples that formed behind them, and how the reflections of the stars moved and danced as they caught on the little waves. The pea-green boat splashed softly through the water, a white line etched around it as it cut through the black. As George became used to the feeling and dared to loosen his grip a little on the ropes, he pointed towards the bag he had hauled down the steps. Barnaby peered inside, smiling to himself as he saw a jar of honey wrapped up in a crisp, clean £5 note. "The guitar, Barnaby, the guitar," said George, and the owl reached in and pulled out the ukulele that Barnaby had borrowed from the corner of Oscar's bedroom. "That's the one. You're supposed to sing to me. It says so in the poem." Barnaby had been daydreaming for that part, and he wasn't quite sure what to sing. So he made up something about a cat and a fiddle and a cow jumping over the moon, and George seemed to like that, so he made up another about how the stars twinkled like diamonds in the sky. George leaned back against the side of the boat and closed his eyes, feeling the breeze dancing through his fur as the little boat sailed gently across the lake. Barnaby's singing and playing was the perfect touch, he thought, and he felt a little shiver of magic race all the way from his whiskers to the very tip of his tail. They stopped abruptly when they came to the shore, the boat having just enough momentum to ease its way onto the beach. George leapt out and felt, for the very first time, the sand beneath his paws. It spilled around and moved strangely, underneath and on his paws, and in his claws all at the same time. Made a brilliant white by the light of the moon, the sand sparkled and shone and shifted and sifted. George buried his nose into it to see what it smelled like, and came up immediately with a huge snort and a sneeze. Barnaby pretended not to notice, busying himself with tying the rope for the boat around a tree. "Is that a bomb tree?" asked George, and Barnaby said he supposed it might very well be exactly that, even though he knew perfectly well it was really a glorious weeping willow that was trailing its branches into the edge of the lake. George went and sniffed the tree, breathing in such a beautiful scent of damp, fresh greenness that even the grass, so wonderful only an hour before, seemed dull in comparison. The world was full in a way he had never known. The pair set out through a meadow, heading towards a farm that stood on a hill. Barnaby skimmed over the long grasses, wings outstretched, and George rushed this way and that, pulled in every direction by new scents and smells, with flowers almost calling out to be breathed in. He found stars that had fallen to the ground and formed delicate white petals, and Barnaby told him this one was called jasmine. A complicated-looking flower with twisted petals and yellow tongues and dabbles of pink was honeysuckle, and some tiny purple flowers that stayed close to the ground and grouped together was, Barnaby told George, something called night-scented stock, and George thought this really rather wonderful that Mother Nature had thought to put together some flowers that smelled especially beautiful during the night. It felt for a moment as if everything had been placed there specially for him to find, to show him how much magic there is if we only go even a little way from our front door. And it was a meandering, wandering, slow sort of walk that finally led them to the edge of the farm. Barnaby guided him across to where the pigs lay snuffling in their sleep, and George walked along to where the largest one lay on his side, a huge brass ring glistening in his nose. "It's just as the poem said," whispered George to Barnaby, and was on the point of waking the pig when the owl held up a wing to stop him. "Why do we need to wake him?" asked Barnaby. "He looks so peaceful." And George felt a little silly as he thought back to the poem, and remembered that in it the owl and the Pussycat used the ring from a pig's nose to be married by the turkey who lived on the hill. Much as he was very fond of Barnaby, and they would, he hoped, remain best friends for many years to come, he wasn't sure that marriage was on the cards, and perhaps it was best if they skipped that part of the poem. "Oh, I just wanted to ask him something," said George, hurrying to add, "but no, you're right, it really doesn't matter. Let's leave him sleeping. He does look so very happy, curled up there in the hay." George was very glad of his grey fur, hiding his blushes as they walked back down the hill and headed once more towards the beach. I'm afraid I don't quite know what a runcible spoon is, he said sadly, as he unpacked the rest of the things from the bag. Will this do? He asked Barnaby, holding up a teaspoon. I think it's perfect, reassured the owl, pulling the corners of a tartan tea towel that was serving them well as a picnic rug. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon, recited George, and hand in hand, on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the... Barnaby, we must dance. George jumped up and pulled Barnaby towards him, and paw holding wing, they danced slowly along the shore. A nightingale landed in the weeping willow and poured its beautiful song into the night, and a frog jumped onto a lily pad and softly added his glorious deep voice to the tune. George had spent many evenings talking with Barnaby and laughing with Barnaby, sharing ideas and thoughts and hopes and dreams, but he had never for a moment imagined that he might one day dance with him by the light of the moon. The big grey cat smiled to himself as he placed his paws carefully on the sand, soaking up every moment and sensation so that he might remember them forever. And as the sky slowly turned from black to the deepest blue, and the stars disappeared one by one, George and Barnaby climbed back into the pea-green boat. Once more, George hoisted the sail, and once more they moved gently through the water, gliding silently towards the other side of the lake, and sending ripples rolling back towards the shore. By the time they reached the side, George's eyes were beginning to close. He had spent many nights awake for hours, looking up at the moon and stars, but he had never been awake for so long and seen and felt so many new things all at once. It was a very tired George who pulled the boat back into the little dock, and a very tired George who set out across the grass damp with dew. He knew he needed to be home before Oscar and Ollie were awake, but he allowed himself to find one more patch of jasmine and breathe in deeply the glorious scent. Barnaby followed as George went up the fire escape, the great grey cat's legs feeling heavier with each and every step. He was so tired now, so very, very tired. Each step felt like 1,000, and he longed to be safely curled up at the end of Ollie's bed, safe against the softness of the blankets. A few more steps, and he would be there. Just one last step. And then he was back home, and Barnaby was waving goodbye as he disappeared to head towards his cosy nest, buried, warm and safe, in a hole in a horse-chestnut tree. George replaced the things he'd taken, one by one, with the ukulele returned to the corner of Oscar's room, and the honey, or what was left of it, back on the shelf in the kitchen, and the plates he'd used for the quince and the mince placed along with the pile of dishes that stood waiting to be washed. And finally, he padded his way across the soft carpet and jumped onto the end of Ollie's bed, turning himself around and around to make the blankets wrap gently around his body. And whereas before he had always fallen asleep with dreams of possibilities floating through his mind, this time he had his very own memories of dancing with Barnaby by the light of the moon. And that is how he fell asleep, his soft grey fur rising and falling as he breathed in and out and dreamed those magical dreams of moments that were and moments that might be and moments that are only made possible when we let ourselves believe in the infinite wonder of the world. We are drifting towards dreams now, the happiest, loveliest dreams you've ever dreamt. We're calm and cozy. Your breathing is relaxed and you can feel that lovely weight of the blanket keeping you safe and warm. Aren't you comfy? You are so warm and cozy, so sleepy. As you drift into dreams, count all the things you're grateful for. Let yourself fill up with all of the little moments that made you smile today. See the faces of the people that made you laugh. Think of the things that challenged you. Think of the things you learned and the practice that meant you'll be a little bit better tomorrow than you were today. Think about how warm and cozy and sleepy you are here in your bed. What a day you had. Wonderful things lie ahead for you too. You will have wonderful adventures tomorrow and the next day and the one after that. The whole world is waiting for you. But there's no rush. There's nothing more to do today. All that's left for today is rest, deep, cozy sleep. The most beautiful of dreams are waiting for you now. That's why you're drifting off, gently, into dreamland. So keep breathing slowly. Let yourself get toasty warm. Let your eyelids stay heavy. And know that you are safe. Remember that you are smart. You are brave. You are kind. And you are loved. Think it to yourself. I am smart. I am brave. I am kind. I am loved. You are a dream. When tomorrow comes, you'll face it with a smile, because you are smart, brave, kind and loved, because you are you, uniquely, wonderfully you. What kind of dream are you drifting towards tonight? You can dream however you want, because your imagination is as wide as the universe. What will you find in tonight's dream? Maybe you'll see your favourite characters. Is that Hector and Sunny over there? Maybe you'll visit the moon where there's mice eating cheese in the craters. Maybe you'll walk through Sleepy Forest, where Coco the koala is strumming his pink ukulele on the banks of Sleepy River. Let your imagination take you away. Your dreams are all yours, and you deserve the sweetest dreams of all, because you are brave, you are kind, and you are loved. You are brave, you are kind, and you are loved. And you are wonderfully, uniquely you. You are a dream, and it's time to sleep, tucked up in your bed. Breathe slowly and melt into your bed. Isn't it warm and soft and cozy? It's time to rest. Take deep breaths in and out and let yourself relax as you say goodbye to the day. Let your body get even heavier. Let your whole body go floppy. Drift deeper into sleep with every breath and say goodnight. Remember, tomorrow will be a good day because you have a big heart. You are a good friend. You believe in yourself. You know there's nothing better to be than yourself. It's okay to get things wrong. It's okay to ask for help. You can do whatever you set your mind to. Be proud to be different. Be proud of your achievements. Be proud of yourself. You are a good learner. You are a good listener. You are a good example to others. You are valued. You are loved. You are sleepy. So drift off now, little one. Let the dreams take over. As you sleep, let your dreams take you to magical lands and faraway places. Remember, there's no room for worries in your dreams, just magic. It's a magic place where anything can happen, anything you want. It's a place of positivity and light. Let positivity soak into you and fill you up. Imagine it as a golden light traveling from the tips of your toes to the top of your head. Imagine that wherever the light touches you fills with happiness. Imagine that the light makes you feel calm. You're wrapped in a warm, cozy glow within your soft, toasty blanket. Isn't that nice? You are safe, tucked up tight. So sleep soundly all through the night. Sweet dreams, little one. I'll see you soon.